Good morning, everyone. How are you? Thanks for coming. My name is Daniel Serber, and I work in the law firm Serber and Associates BA. It has my name on it, so I founded the law firm, but many years ago. And we specialize in real estate transactions, but within the real estate transactions, our specialty really is representing foreign buyers. I was originally born in Argentina a few years ago, and we moved to the United States in 1982. I went to law school at University of Florida, my undergraduate studies at University of Miami. I'm a hurricane at heart, and graduated as a lawyer in 1994. The first 5 years or so of my practice, I worked in a law firm in downtown Miami, and then in February of 2000, I opened an office in Aventura. Now, we've been there for over 18 years in the same office, same location, but we also opened an office in Argentina. So I wanted to first thank Acqualina and the sales team for planning this and for inviting me to participate in this lecture. For me, it's an honor to be here. I love this project. I'll tell you why later, but I love this project. And I do represent a number of developers as well, but this is one of my favorite projects. And the idea of today's presentation is to give you a little bit of insight from my experience on how to best represent foreign buyers. And we're going to go over both some practical aspects of representing foreign buyers and some technical aspects. We'll even get a little bit towards the end on some tax issues and structuring issues. But this is a very informal presentation. Hello. This is a very informal presentation, so I do want you to interrupt me if you have questions. Don't get upset. I like that back and forth questions and answers, so please feel free to raise your hand or call on me or whatever, and we'll take your questions. And hopefully the presentation will last 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer session that's going to last around 15 minutes at the end, and then I'm going to stick around if you have individual questions and you're a little bit embarrassed or afraid to ask questions in front of everyone else. Both Mari Carmen, who's an attorney in my office, and myself will be here to answer your questions. Okay? Yes?
I'm sorry, are you a real estate attorney or tax attorney?
Real estate attorney. I'm a real estate attorney. Our specialty is real estate and corporate work. But because we represent foreign nationals, we do give a little bit of tax advice for foreign nationals on structuring their investments in the U.S. So that's the limit on what our tax advice is on. So the topics we're going to cover today. Okay, and we have a small PowerPoint presentation, but I'll go in order. So even if you can't see it very well, you'll be able to follow us. Understanding the foreign buyers. And understanding the foreign buyers is key. To be able to sell them properties and to keep that relationship going for many years. And there's two things we're going to talk about: cultural differences and procedural differences. Understanding how the foreign buyer does business in their home country is key, and understanding how they see things differently here and how to explain those differences to them so that they feel a little more at ease in investing here, especially if it's their first time that they're investing here in the U.S. And then we're going to move to structuring, tax, and other considerations. And then I'm going to try to sales pitch my firm, but very, very towards the end. But actually, it's not really a sales pitch, but I'll show you how I present myself to the foreign buyers and to other brokers, so you can kind of take some of that with you as you talk to foreign buyers as well. All right. So understanding the foreign buyer. Cultural differences. Some of the things is pretty obvious, right? But I'll give you some examples. The foreign buyers typically, they have this concept of family, and it's not just their family, their immediate, family, but the professionals that they deal with become part of their family. And so you have to get into that mindset that you need to get to know them. You need to understand what they like, who they are, the inter-family relationships, because the more you know them, the better, and the more you incorporate into their families, the more they're going to trust you, the more they're going to rely on you, and they're going to do more business with you. That definitely requires a lot of hand-holding. We have, when I opened my firm back in the year 2000, I came from a firm that didn't have really a lot of experience representing foreign buyers. So one of the things that I realized is if I wanted to create a market niche for me, Because of my background and being raised in Argentina, I thought maybe I should target that type of client. But if I do, I have to change the way I do business, right? Because I used to be in a firm that every time somebody would call me, we would have to bill the client on an hourly basis. Foreign buyers are not necessarily used to that, don't like that. I realized after a while, being there for 5 years, people didn't call me for my birthday. I said, well, that's not good. So when I opened my own firm, I said, you know what? We're going to change the way we do things. And what I decided to do, is to really not bill the clients on an hourly basis, to be very upfront to them and tell them exactly what the fees were going to be at the very beginning, but make them feel like they can call me whenever they want. They can come visit me whenever they want. I get this all the time, especially now because in South America, for example, right now is their winter break. There's a lot of people from Brazil, there's a lot of people from Argentina right now because they have that 2-week break and their kids are off from school. And I get this all the time. Somebody walking into my office in Aventura with their flip-flops and their bathing suits without an appointment, right? And like, what are you doing here? Well, I just dropped off my family at the Aventura Mall or in Bal Harbour and I just wanted to have a little cafecito with my lawyer. Okay. All right, and you have to kind of, accommodate that so that they feel comfortable and welcome. Once you get that trust, you become the person that they trust. They don't have too many people that they trust here in the U.S. So it goes above and beyond the issue of giving them advice on what properties to buy. They'll rely on you for everything. They'll ask you about, buying a car. Obviously they're going to ask you about decorating their apartment. They're going to ask you about insurance. They're going to ask you about accountants. They're going to ask you about a million things because you are now their person of trust. And that's something that you need to be prepared for. The face-to-face communications is also key. I found that, with my American clients, it's easy for me to just email, text, and, everything's email, and it's very simple, and it's very quick, and it's very efficient. But with the foreign buyer, they like more face-to-face. One of the things that I tell this story all the time is in the real estate crisis in 2008, 2009, I went from doing an average of maybe 50 to 60 residential closings per month to maybe doing 2. And so I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? Everybody was dying and the banks were not lending. It was chaos. And people were really panicking. The people that did own real estate wanted to get rid of them, and it was the wrong time to sell. And so I thought to myself, what can I do to change the practice? What can I do to generate more business? And I realized that obviously the foreign buyer is not accustomed to buying so much with loans. They're accustomed to buying cash. And so the issue that we were having with banks didn't really affect the foreign buyer, but it created this massive hysteria, and nobody wanted to touch the market because it was burning. But then I said, well, if they have the cash, then cash is king nowadays. They can come here and select whatever they want. And so I started doing these presentations in foreign countries, explaining to them in 2008, 2009, explaining to the buyers why it was really a good time for them to buy back then. And they would look at me like, are you crazy? We'd look at the newspaper, we'd see CNN and Fox News and everything else, and we see that the banks are closing, people are bankrupt. This is the right time for you guys to buy. You don't need loans. And so when I realized that that was an opportunity, I started going more frequently, and I generated my own business. I didn't wait in my office waiting for this thing to just pass by or for somebody to knock on the door. What I went is I went and got that business. And you have to do the same thing for the foreign buyer. Even in a time that it's not a crisis, they want you to go and visit them. They want you to go and see what they do. They want you, so if you just stay here and wait for them to knock on your door to call you, you're not going to get a lot of the business that you can definitely get if you actually are proactive and you go, right? And so if you go and you visit, even if you don't have too many clients, you can just go and visit a country and make it semi-vacation, semi-work, and go and visit them and talk to realtors there and find out if they can present you to, and go, and once you start and they see you, the face-to-face becomes very important. And that's how we generated a lot of relationships and clients through the time for our firm. The other important thing is that you have to eliminate obstacles. there's many obstacles and many fears for the foreign buyer. First is distance. They're not here. The unknown. I've never bought something there, and my God, I don't know what the laws are, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not going to be there to deal with any issues, and so you have to try to eliminate those possible obstacles and basically to serve the transaction on a platter to them. Make it easy. So, I'll give you some examples in a little bit, but one of the reasons why we opened the office in Argentina is because it takes 9 hours to fly from Argentina to Miami. We have a lot of Mexican clients. We have clients from all over South America, Central America, Canada, Europe. But in Argentina, which is one of the most southern countries in South America, it takes 9 hours to go on a flight and come here. And so we said, if we have a presence in Argentina, people from all over the country, the different countries in South America, can come visit us, and we can try to do the closings there. And we do our closings there to the people that want to come here. And we make it easy. Whatever issues need to be addressed, we address them and we solve it for them. We really have to go above and beyond and not just serve as lawyers. We have to serve as a facilitator for the transaction. And that's what you need to do as well in order to get that business from foreign nationals. So let's talk a little bit about the procedural differences. Because if you understand what they go through when they buy real estate in their home countries, you're going to be better able to understand what their concerns are, and you're going to be able to put away those fears for them. So one of the things that I found is one main difference is that in most foreign countries, the real estate transaction is handled by a notario, a notary, or escribano. So what is that? It doesn't exist in the United States, right? So we have notary publics, but it's so different. What notario does in the rest of the world is so much different than what a notary public does here. And there's a misconception, and sometimes, unfortunately, people here take advantage of people that come to the U.S. thinking, oh, the notario is someone really important because they give faith to certain acts, and whatever the notario says is the law. Whatever the notario certifies is true. It's not the case with a notary public. You know that notary public in Florida is anyone over the age of 18, right? That lives in Florida, that files an application online, takes a little test, and that's it. But it's not the case in other countries. And so the notary is a person of trust, and the notary represents a transaction. The notary in foreign countries represents the transaction. There's no lawyers involved. There's one notary that represents the transaction. It's not like a buyer and seller have each their lawyer. And so many of your foreign clients will come in and say, okay, so there's one lawyer or notary that's representing the transaction. I don't need representation. Well, that's not necessarily true. We do things differently here, right? So that's important to understand. By a show of hands, I just want to know, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, does anybody know what a civil law notary is? Raise your hand if you know what a civil law notary is. No? Well, I was hoping you guys can explain it to me. But anyway, I asked the same question. Don't worry. I asked the same question in front of 100 lawyers, Florida lawyers, and I asked the same thing. By show of hands, can somebody tell me what a civil law notary is? And nobody raised their hands, so don't feel bad. A Florida civil law notary is actually something relatively new. It's only 10 years old. And it's something that the state of Florida was the first state in the United States that they did to try to assimilate what other countries do and how they do their transactions. A civil law notary is a lawyer, right, that's been practicing for at least 5 years in the U.S. They have to be vetted by the Department of State and the Florida bar, or whatever the state bar is. You have to take a special course, and you have to take a very difficult exam to pass. But once you become a civil law notary, or it's also called an international notary, you tend to do the same things that an escribano or a notary does abroad. And it really facilitates the transaction. I'll give you some examples in a little bit. But can somebody guess how many civil law notaries we have in the United States to date? The United States is a very big country. How many lawyers do we have in the United States? Millions, right? Exactly, I agree. I like that question. That's true. But civil law notaries, we have 122 in the United States, okay? So what does a civil law notary do? Civil law notary facilitates a transaction. A civil law notary can act abroad, if he's present there, and notarize documents outside of the state of Florida. Like, for example, I'm a civil law notary, and that's why I'm talking about it. But I'm a civil law notary, and when I go to anywhere in the world where a client of mine is doing a transaction, whether they're signing loan documents or they're signing closing documents, if I'm physically there and I'm there while they're signing, I can notarize their documents as a civil law notary there. A notary public can only notarize documents in Florida or in the state where they have their certification. A civil law notary can notarize documents anywhere in the world. You're like an ambulatory embassy, if you will, okay? But the reason why a lot of lawyers elect not to become civil law notaries is because if you are a civil law notary and you don't act properly, and you start certifying things without seeing things or following certain protocol, you're subject to criminal prosecution. You lose your Florida bar license. So most people try to stay away. We use it all the time. That's why I was telling you that we do closings in our office in Argentina, because we can, right? So and so imagine if you were representing a very important high net worth individual that's buying a multi-million-dollar property, and you tell him, listen, the closing will take place August 15th. And he tells, oh, August 15th, I can't make it. So what are your choices? Postponing the closing? Or what if you tell him, look, you really don't have to come here. If you want to, I'll go to your house. If you want to, I'll go to your office. I'll go wherever you are, and we'll close it. And then when you have time, you come here and you do, whatever you need to do. So you facilitate that transaction. And the civil law notary is one of the things that they do. The difference is contracts versus boletos or whatever, and escrow as well. I'll skip to escrows as well. Most foreign buyers don't understand the concept of escrows. Some of them actually feel very uncomfortable. Like, what do you mean I'm giving my money to who? Who is First American, or who is Chicago Title, and who are you? Why should I send you my money, right? So and you have to understand that concern. So one of the ways that I do away with that concern is I explain look at the alternatives. How do you do it in your home country? Well, most of those people, when they buy real estate, they initially sign something called un boleto, which is like a reservation agreement, right? And they pay 30% directly to the seller. So I asked them, what do you prefer? To sign a reservation agreement with the seller and pay the seller directly 30% and then hope and pray that they show up for closing? Or do you prefer to have your money safe in a trust account or an escrow account, and for the seller not to get one penny of that money until they show up to closing, they sign the closing documents, they transfer title, and they give you possession of your property? And when you put it like that, they understand it better. Also, when you tell them that if they get a loan, that the bank sends me their loan money before they even sign a document, puts them a little more at ease. So understanding the escrow accounts that they're not used to, the form of payment. And especially in Latin America, and Europe is not like this, but in Latin America, it's crazy. You spend more time counting bills at the closing. I've done a couple of closings in Latin America. They count, it's all cash. There's no wire transfers, there's no checks, no cashier's checks, no money orders, nothing like that. It's all cash. So first of all, it's very dangerous because you have to transport cash, large sums of cash as the buyer, and then the seller, when they see them going out of the bank, you hear all the time how people get robbed and whatever. But the most time-consuming part of the transaction, and especially in Latin America, is the counting of the bills. It's insane. It doesn't happen here. So we try to explain to them the fact that don't bring cash, wire transfers, and how, we don't even take cashier's checks. On very rare circumstances, we take cashier's checks, but mostly everything right now is through wire transfers. And then the other thing to point out is the additional protections that they have if they buy real estate here. For example, we represent a lot of buyers that buy pre-construction, right? And they have no idea about the 15 days, except when they come here, and obviously because the staff is very professional, and they'll tell them, or the brokers will tell them, you can sign the contract, you have 15 days to change your mind, right? But that doesn't exist in other countries. When they sign the contract, the pre-construction contract, they get their condo docs, right? And there are foreign countries, they don't get the condo docs until they're closing. So I tell them, look, listen, they're giving you everything in advance. I mean, there's no surprises here. There, you sign the contract, you send the developer the money directly, you're hoping that they're going to finish the project, right? And then at the end, you close. They give you possession first, even sometimes before you even do the closing, and they give you the title to the property. And then they give you the condo docs. So then, you read about all these restrictions and use restrictions and whatever, and you had no idea about that those existed. Here's more transparent. There's no surprises, and that's why you need to try to sell and convey that to them. The other thing that I find interesting, that a lot of clients on pre-construction tell me, well, this is a problem. This contract says there's a pre-sale contingency. If the developer doesn't sell X number of units by a certain date, then they can cancel my contract. I go, that's a good thing. Is that a bad thing? I mean, how many projects in the rest of the world have filed for bankruptcy and the people have lost their money? I like the fact that the developer is putting that restriction. That restriction typically comes directly from the construction lender that's going to tell them, I'm not going to finance your construction until you sell X number of units. So I tell the buyers, listen, the construction lender is actually your guardian angel. They're protecting you. So if things don't go as planned for the developer, they're going to give you back your money. It's secure. There's no risk there. Okay, so you're going to have to look for another property. But how often does that happen? Not very often. But I'd rather have that restriction in the contract than not have any at all, and then for the money to be at risk. The concept of title insurance. There's no such thing as title insurance in foreign countries, except maybe in Mexico they started. But title insurance protects the buyers. Any title issues that come up later after the closing, they don't have to worry about it. They have a title insurance policy that covers them. They're not going to be prohibited from getting another loan or from selling their property. The title insurance company will handle it. And we try to explain that to them. Okay? And the other thing that we tell them is, actually, we're always welcome to come here, but there's no need to come to closing. In most other countries, you have to go to closing. Here, you don't have to come to closing. We can handle everything by mail or somewhere else. So now I want to turn to other considerations, which is structuring and tax issues that we deal with the foreign nationals, okay? And I'm going to add a couple more things, not just tax issues, but confidentiality is another issue that we need to talk about. So before, like 5 years ago, I would never talk about confidentiality. That was a non-issue, but we'll incorporate that into today's discussion. But there's really 4 types of taxes that can affect the investment by a foreign national in real estate in the U.S., okay? And the reason why I'm explaining all this to you is not for you don't have to learn. I'm not going to take a test after the lecture. And it's really not for you to teach your clients. It's just for you to be aware. Because if you represent the buyer that doesn't have any representation, and they're buying the property in their individual names, I think it's in your best interest, and the way that you protect your client's interest is for you to tell them, look, you should consult with an attorney or a tax consultant or an accountant so that you know what's the best way of taking title to the property so you're not faced with issues down the road. And they're going to thank you for that. And don't be scared. I think one important thing is for you to surround yourself with good professionals. You can't force your clients to go and see me or see an accountant or whatever, but you can recommend different professionals. But you should recommend professionals that you know are going to help you make the deal while protecting your client's interest, right? I tell my clients this all the time. As far as lawyers go in South Florida, I think it's that do real estate, there's 2 categories, and it's so clear, and I know where they fall right away. You have the deal makers and the deal breakers, right? So I mean, there's no middle ground. Either you're a deal maker or you're a deal breaker, right? And so surround yourself with professionals that are deal makers and not deal breakers. That without really compromising your client's position. We're deal makers, but we're going to do everything that we can to make the deal happen. If the deal doesn't happen, we don't charge the client any money. Okay, so that doesn't mean that we're going to ignore issues in the contract or we're going to just look the other way. It just means that we know how to deal with those issues and we have solutions that are well accepted in the developer community with other lawyers. And so we're protecting the client's interest, but we're making the deal happen. And you need to surround yourselves with those type of people. And so don't be afraid with saying, hey, maybe you should consult with a lawyer about how to take title to this property. Especially if you know that those lawyers are not going to steal your client. They're not going to tell them not to buy there. They're not going to offer them something else. And that's why you need to surround yourselves with those type of professionals. But anyway, going on to the tax structuring. 4 taxes that may affect a real estate investment for foreign national: estate tax, income tax, dividend tax, FERPTA. Those are the 4 taxes. Estate tax, I want to go one by one. Estate tax is probably the scariest one and the easiest one to avoid. But it's scary because it affects the investments that foreign nationals have in the U.S. in the event of death, right? So that is the main reason why we don't recommend foreign nationals to take title to their properties in their individual names. Because God forbid, should they die, that investment is subject to estate tax. And there's a huge difference between how the estate tax is calculated for Americans versus how it's calculated for foreign nationals, right? So for Americans, we have a large tax exemption of estate tax. I think it's now $5.2 million. So most of Americans are not really subject to estate tax, right? And the ones that are lucky enough to have a net worth over that amount consult with lawyers and estate planners to create trust and other mechanisms to increase that exemption. And so it's very little of what's really subject to estate tax. But does anyone know what the estate tax exemption is for foreign nationals? It's not $5.2 million. It's $60,000. So the first $60,000, no taxes. Anything over and above $60,000, 40%. It's actually a little more than 40%, but it's too complicated of a formula, but let's just think 40%. It's a lot of money, right? So, and this is not something new. This estate tax for foreign nationals has existed for years and years. So historically, and I'll go back into history a little bit, what did foreign nationals do to protect their investments in the U.S.? They used to open offshore companies, okay? An offshore company is typically a company that's a non-U.S. company that is typically from one of those places or countries that are, people don't pay taxes. So by opening a company from that jurisdiction or from that country, they don't have any requirements to pay to that country any taxes on any gains or any income that that company has. But why does the offshore company protect the foreign national from estate tax? Because the estate tax for foreign nationals affects their real estate holdings in the U.S. and any shares or membership interests that they have in U.S. companies. So if a foreign national has a bank account here in Bank of America and they have it in their individual name and all they have in the account is cash, is that subject to estate tax? No. Cash is not subject to estate tax for a foreign national. But if they have a portfolio account with Merrill Lynch or whatever stockbroker they have, and they have U.S. bonds or U.S. stocks, is that subject to estate tax? Yes, it is. So, but shares, owning shares in a foreign company or an offshore company is not subject to estate tax. So they used to buy properties with an offshore company. They own the shares of the offshore company. If they died, no problem, not subject to estate tax. It doesn't matter what the offshore company owns in the United States. The offshore company doesn't die. People die. So that was the answer to the estate tax issue, and that's why for many years people used to buy and sell properties with offshore companies. But what happened? Those same people that were buying and selling properties with offshore companies decided, well, these offshore companies are kind of interesting because they're very secretive. They don't have tax ID numbers. They don't file tax returns in the U.S. It used to be that the shares could be left blank, or it could be bare shares, or whoever had physical possession of the certificate was the owner of the company. So it was very difficult to understand who the owner of the offshore company was. And so these people that used to buy real estate here with offshore companies used to sell the real estate, never file tax returns in the U.S., collect all the money, and leave. Well, that's a no-no for the IRS, right? The IRS says, okay, you guys are welcome to invest in the US, but whatever money you make here, profits you make here, you have to pay taxes on that. But if I don't know who you are, the shares are blank or bearer shares, you don't have a tax ID number, how am I going to get, I don't know who to go after. I mean, how am I going to chase you down? And that's where the FIRPTA withholding came up. FIRPTA today has evolved during over time, but FIRPTA today applies in the sale of real estate where the seller is a foreign national or it's a foreign company. So in a sale of real estate, when a seller is a foreign national or a foreign company, we withhold 15% of the selling price. Not of the gain, not on the profit, of the selling price. And it's not really a tax, it's just we withhold it and we send it to the IRS, and the IRS says, okay, you want your money back? Get a tax return, get a tax number, file a tax return. We'll determine how much money you owe us. We'll collect our tax from whatever we withheld from you, and then we'll give you back the difference. And they do give you back. You get a check from the Department of Treasury in the mail. It takes 6 months approximately. But what happens with that? Foreign nationals don't like to have any monies withheld. It's normal. I mean, if you were selling a property, you want 100% of the sales proceeds on the day of closing. You don't wait 6 months. The other thing is, it's very different when you go to the accountant that you trust and say, hey, let me show you this. I bought this piece of property. Here's my closing statement from when I bought the property, and this is the closing statement where I sold the property. But you know something? I'm not from Miami, but I had to go to Miami 5 different times to take care of things related to the property. So here's my airline tickets. This is the hotel where I stayed. This is the car that I rented. These are the meals that I had. I had to buy this iPhone for this, and then, and whatever. And so the account puts all those expenses as part of the business, and then obviously the net gain is reduced, and so the tax implication is less. But that's easier to do when you talk to somebody that you've selected and they can understand and see all the paperwork and they voluntarily file a tax return versus having 15% of your sales proceeds retained or withheld and then not being able to speak to anyone in the IRS, God forbid, and not and basically you end up paying more taxes. So the reason why most of you have seen that foreign nationals buy real estate with U.S. companies, LLCs, corporations, whatever, is to avoid the FIRPTA withholding. That's it. There's no other reason. Is when they sell that property, right? The one selling is the U.S. company, and so there's no withholding. That's the reason. So now you know why people and lawyers recommend U.S. entities for buying. But the U.S. entities don't protect them of the estate tax, right? Because if I set up a U.S. corporation or a LLC to buy an apartment here in Acqualina, and I put the shares or the membership interest of that entity in the name of my individual foreign national clients, and one of them dies, they're subject to estate tax. So typically, the typical transaction for foreign national has a dual component. It has the U.S. entity that takes title to the property for purposes of FIRPTA withholding, and then it has the offshore entity that owns the shares in the company or on the LLC. Now, a couple years ago, we had the whole thing with the Panama Papers and offshore companies, and the Herald had a feast about dirty money, and they're starting, talking about the same thing now in the last couple of weeks, dirty money and how foreign nationals are using real estate in South Florida to launder money and all that stuff. But the truth is that, that's generalizing the situation. You're always going to find bad apples among, the whole thing. But most people that use foreign companies or offshore companies do it for legitimate reasons, like avoiding estate tax. The U.S. government fully acknowledges that the use of offshore companies by foreign nationals is legal. Not only it's illegal, but if a client comes to my office and I don't recommend, a foreign national, and I don't recommend to them at some point of the conversation for them to include in their structure an offshore company, I'm committing malpractice. And newspapers don't talk about that. They like the whole, Miami Vice thing. It's money laundering. But no. But FinCEN and the Department of Treasury have enacted a number of geographic targeting orders to try to combat money laundering. And with everything that we have in place, I think it's pretty much a perfect fit, because the U.S. government will have the information that they need to make sure that there are no bad apples investing here, but they're still giving us the tools to protect the clients from estate tax and from other taxes. So U.S. companies to protect you from FIRPTA, offshore companies to protect you from the estate tax. So if you have the double structure, the first two taxes, well, the estate tax and the FIRPTA withholding are gone, no longer an issue. Yeah.
I understand that, and maybe I don't understand.
Okay.
The question is this. I heard that if you open up a company and it's fully vested, so everything that you own is in the name of that company, LLC or whatever, you don't have to do the offshore company.
That's not true. The offshore company, because remember, if the LLC, and that the LLC protects you from not having to withhold on the sale. It doesn't protect you from estate tax. And the reason is because membership interest in the LLC are subject to estate tax. And so let's just say that our clients are husband and wife that are foreign nationals. And I open a Delaware LLC that buys a unit here in Acqualina. Okay, and I put the membership interest in the name of the husband or the wife. And even if I put him as husband and wife or tenants by the entireties, I'm not going to have an issue if one of them dies. I'm not going to have an issue from a legal perspective, from a probate perspective, because it's clear in the documents that the surviving spouse will own 100%, but I still have an estate tax issue. So even if it's fully vested and if you put everything into the LLC, that doesn't protect you from the estate tax issue for foreign nationals.
No, even a life estate.
The what?
No, even a life estate with a remanderment wouldn't.
Well, if you mean a life estate as opposed to a fee simple in the title?
Yeah, the parents being a life estate and then with a remanderment with their...
Yeah, because remember, when somebody dies, you have two issues that you have to address. One is the legal issue. Who does it belong to? Who are the heirs? How do we transfer title from the people that died to the beneficiaries? That's one issue. But a totally independent and a separate and apart issue is a tax issue.
So they still have to pay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So it's an issue.
So
Go ahead.
even if you avoid probate,
Right.
you're still liable for that estate.
Yes.
And how would the IRS determine that in fact the property belongs to a foreign national, when in fact the property was titled to the LLC?
Oh, because the LLC files tax returns, and the schedule for the tax returns, you put the names of the members that have more than 20% interest in the LLC. And when the IRS sees that there's a discrepancy between 1 year and the next year, they start asking questions. They say, okay, so in 2016, it belonged to husband and wife. 2017 belonged to the wife.
Because he passed away.
So it passed away, so where's the estate tax?
But the point is, how do they know that in fact your limit is $60,000 versus $5 million?
Oh.
The property is actually owned by the LLC.
Right, because the limit is not based on who owns the property, but it's based on where the person that died maintained its domicile, permanent domicile. So if the person that died maintained their permanent domicile in Brazil, it's going to be $60,000.
So if you're an American citizen,
Yeah.
you're born in the United States, now you live in Brazil, and your personal domicile is in Brazil, would that apply?
That's a good question. If you are a U.S. citizen, there's an exemption, and you will have the 5.2 million exemption. But if it doesn't work the other around, yeah.
It's either or.
What do you mean?
Like the client should choose, do you want to avoid state tax? or-
No, you avoid both by doing the structure with a U.S. entity owning title and the offshore owning the shares of the corporation. So you do both, and you avoid both.
And in
Yeah.
essence, the offshore company owns the LLC?
Yes. Now, there's an alternative to an offshore company, because even after I tell my clients about the whole speech about how offshore companies are not that bad and they're allowed and permitted here in the U.S., some clients don't want to do anything to do with an offshore company. So an alternative to an offshore company is to create an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust also protects the clients from estate tax issues. And so you can have an irrevocable trust owning the membership interest, for example, of the LLC, or an irrevocable trust owning the shares in the corporation. The reason why, for my foreign nationals, I don't like irrevocable trust, and it's a matter of preferences, that has nothing to do with the legal issue, is because the irrevocable trust that protects the clients from estate tax liabilities is one where the client has to abandon control. They loses control of their assets. And I know my foreign clients, and they don't like to lose control.
But is it more than just control, or are you talking about control to ownership? Are you equating both?
No.
Because the problem that I understand with the irrevocable trust is that everything belongs to the trust. So you can't even transfer that to
Right.
your children, to any
Right.
heirs, to anyone else. So
Right.
how do you actually gain it back?
You don't gain it back when it's irrevocable. And the thing I don't like about irrevocable trust is you have to name a trustee that runs the trust, that operates the trust. And the trustee can't be you, your spouse, or one of the beneficiaries. So you really, really, really have to trust somebody to be your trustee. And guys, things change, people change. Maybe I trust you today, and maybe, I don't know, in 10 years, and I can't change it. But then, you talk to colleagues that love irrevocable trust, and I always have these debates with them, and when I talk to them about the issue of control, which is my big argument, they say, well, but you can insert things in the trust that give you some control. Like, for example, you can insert somebody called a trust protector. And I go, what's a trust protector? A trust protector is the police officer for the trustee. Oh, but it's another person. Can I be the trust protector? No, you can't be the trust protector. So I have to now rely on a second person to be the police officer of another person that I may or may not trust in 10 years. Not for me.
Question for
Yeah.
the LLC, are you able to deduce the property value over 27.5 years?
For the depreciation, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's the question more for an accountant, but yes, I love LLCs, and I'll tell you why I love LLCs. I love LLCs because the LLCs gives a lot more options and has a lot more flexibility than corporations. The LLC, you can elect from a tax perspective how to treat it, the LLC. Even if you have an LLC, you can elect to treat it as a corporation. You can elect to treat it as a partnership. You can elect to treat it as a disregarded entity. So basically, when we file the LLC for a client, we elect from a tax perspective, understanding what the client wants and they need, how to treat it from a tax perspective, and yeah, depending on how you treat it, you may be able to take the 27.
Most of the value where they come from, right? They
Yeah.
won't invest, but they do the depreciating assets.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, your company will set up the offshore and will set up the LLC here in the United States. So we'll set up the entire entity structure for the ownership. Can they use that foreign entity even for their own?
Great question. I love your question. Thank you so much. That was the next thing I want to talk about. Yeah, legally, the question was, okay, your firm sets up with the client, the corporation, and the offshore company. Yes, we do. And then the second question was, can they use that Florida corporation for other things? So they bought an apartment in Acqualina with a corporation. Can they use that corporation to buy other things or do other things with it? There's two answers, and that's why lawyers love multiple answer questions. The first direct answer is legally they can use it for whatever they want, but that's not what we recommend. We don't recommend using that corporation for other things than just owning the apartment. For a number of reasons. Some are legal answers, which I'll tell you now, and some are tax issues. The legal issues are very simple, right? I own an apartment in Acqualina with a corporation, and I also own a Bentley that I bought with the same corporation. And I have insurance in my apartment, and I have insurance for my Bentley, right? But then one day I decided to give Mari Carmen my Bentley to take it out for the weekend, right? And Mary Carmen went out and had a great time, and on the way back, she just didn't see 18 people that were crossing the street and ran them over. Who's responsible?
The corporation.
Huh?
The corporation.
Right, and what does the corporation have?
The apartment.
The apartment and the car. The car probably doesn't exist anymore, and the corporate. So why are you going to expose that, right? So that's your liability. The issue of tax is the dividend tax, which I'm going to skip to. When you have that structure, and we have a corporation and the owner of the corporation is an offshore company, if you pay dividends to the offshore company. In certain cases, you have to pay a second tax in addition to the income tax, which is the dividend tax. So it gets complicated, but I'll try to simplify things for you. And it's like this. The dividend tax doesn't apply when you make the last distribution to the offshore company or to the foreign national. And so if you, with that corporation, only own one property, the rent, if you're going to rent the property, it's really not an issue because between the property taxes, the insurance, the depreciation, even though you're going to get money in your pockets, you're not going to have a true gain and you're going to pay dividend tax. The issue is when you sell the property. But if you only own one apartment with that corporation, when you sell the apartment, you dissolve the corporation and all the money passes through free of any dividend tax. But if that corporation owns other assets, when you sell the apartment, you won't be able to dissolve the corporation. And so either you don't distribute, you reinvest the money, or you leave it in the account in order to avoid the dividend tax. You won't be able to dissolve it unless you get rid of all the assets that a company has.
Now, because the money are with the U.S. entity too, can they take advantage of a 1031 exchange?
Yes.
Like was it
Yeah, absolutely.
foreigners?
Absolutely. Yes, but you have to be a little bit careful. Yes, the answer is you can take a U.S. corporation, U.S. LLC can do a 1031 exchange, but you have to be careful because the 1031 exchange only applies for investment property. So if the client, takes the position that, well, that's really my house. Is your house an investment property? Yeah. So it's for purposes of audits down the road. So basically, what we try to do is we document that this was an investment, and then we do the 1031.
So you would really suggest to have one entity for every property?
Absolutely.
One entity foreigner and one entity local?
The foreign entity,
foreigner
the foreign entity can be the same because it gets expensive. We try to simplify things. I mean, we don't want to make it costly or difficult. The foreign entity can be just one owning all the different U.S. entities, right? But everything else, separate entities. The last tax I want to talk about is the income tax or capital gains. Depending on how long you hold your real estate asset, they're going to pay capital gains or income tax. So if you hold your real estate for over a year and you have the right structure, you're going to be paying capital gains as opposed to paying income tax. But that's something that we'll talk to the clients. And again, it's not for you to give a lecture to your clients because you're not the experts, you're not the lawyers, you're not the accountants, but it's for you to get a just general basic understanding that all these issues are present. And so if you see that your client is buying and they're not getting the advice that they need to get, then you should direct them to the right professional. And believe me, nobody walks away from our office saying, I'm not making the deal, this is too complicated. Nobody. I mean, that's not our objective. Our objective is to protect them. Actually, they'll walk away from our office and call you and say, hey, thank you so much for referring me to Danny or to Mary Carmen or Joanna or whoever, because now I understand and I feel like I'm protected. Yes?
Capital gains before the tax overall was $500,000 for a married couple as an exemption, right? Is that still the same, or did that change?
Under the new tax thing, I believe that's, I don't know, I think it's the same. But the rates have changed. It used to be that it was 15 or 20 plus 3.9 for the Obamacare. And now most people are going to be paying either 15 or 20%. But I think it's 400 and something thousand. I don't remember exactly what the number is on the new. We're just applying the new tax changes. So, but I can get back to you on that. If you give me your card, I'll give you an answer. Any other questions?
I have a question about the LLCs, if we can go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
A lot of people like the LLCs, and I understand the reasons why, but I understand there is some deficiencies if you decide to do a sole member LLC.
Right.
And I heard that you can correct that very easily by making the second member the LLC itself. So yourself and the LLC itself. Is that true? Is that false? What are the advantages?
It's true and false.
Okay.
Did that answer your question? No? Okay. All right. So true, a single member LLC has its issues because a single member LLC by default from a tax perspective, is a disregarded entity. And so it doesn't really protect us from the FIRPTA. If you have a foreign national owning an LLC and he's the only or she is the only owners of the LLC, when they sell the property and it's a disregarded entity, a single member LLC, we're not going the fact that it's an LLC selling is not enough. We're going to ask who the owner of the LLC is. If the owner of the LLC is a foreign national, we're going to have the FIRPTA withholding. So that's the issue that a single member LLC presents and real estate transactions. How do you resolve it? It's easy. You can add a second member, but not the LLC itself. You can do the offshore company owning 99% and the individual owning 1%. Typically, that 1% is less than $60,000. So even if they die, there's no estate tax. The other thing you can do is elect to treat the LLC, the single member LLC, as a corporation. If you elect to treat it as a corporation, there's no FIRPTA withholding.
If you treat it as an S corp, I understand about.
S, no,
dividends.
it doesn't. As a C corp.
But a C corp, then the dividends come into play at that point.
Right. The C corp. Foreign nationals can't own any S corps.
Oh.
Okay. So, yes.
When you say state tax, mean Florida tax?
No, estate tax means inheritance tax, death tax. Yeah.
So even if you have a Delaware LLC,
Right.
it's the same thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Delaware versus Florida companies, and then we'll turn to some other questions, and we should be done. So one of the issues that I told you before that we addressed today that we didn't address before is the issue of confidentiality. For foreign nationals, the confidentiality is key. And it's not for, because they're necessarily doing anything wrong in their home countries. It's just that you have to understand the mind frame. I have a lot of Mexican clients, okay? And I remember a few years ago, a Mexican client said to me, listen, you've already represented me in a number of transactions. I have like 5 different Florida entities with you, but I have a problem. I said, what's the problem? Well, if you Google my name, I appeared as being the president or director of all these corporations, and then there's this other website that says that these corporations own these properties, and I said, so what's the problem? And he says, well, the safety of my family. And so you have to understand their mind frames. If they're fearing that somebody's gonna, kidnap their kids and ask for ransom, and they Google the person's name and they see all this information, they don't want that. It's not an issue of money laundering or an issue of illegal activity or whatever. You have to understand that, they elected to move money out of their home countries, invest it here in something that's a secure investment. They want to have that protection and they want to have that confidentiality. So that's one of the issues that we have to address when we're also structuring the investments with a foreign national. Do you want confidentiality? Some people say, I don't care. Okay, if you don't care, it's easier for me. I'll put you in as a director, president, or whatever. But if you do care, then we have to think about maybe going through a Delaware company or Delaware LLC. Delaware doesn't report on the internet who the managers or the directors are. Florida does. But then, if I have to ask them, I go, listen, what's your intent? You bought a property in Acqualina. What are you going to do with it? Is it for your own personal use? Are you going to rent it? And they tell me, well, if for my personal use, then use a Delaware entity, no problem. But if they're going to rent it and they're going to generate income in Florida, then that Delaware entity needs to be registered here. And then once you register the Delaware entity here, then the directors appear on the internet. So, but there's ways that we advise, and we're problem solvers. We're not deal breakers. So it's not like we're going to, scare the client and say, hey, you have an issue. If confidentiality is your issue, then don't buy here. No, we're going to tell them, look, this is the way that we're going to resolve it. Maybe we set up an additional LLC. Maybe we do a Florida LLC because they're going to be renting, and we set up a Delaware LLC that's going to be the manager of the Florida LLC. So no names appear anywhere. There are ways and ways of dealing with the confidentiality. So that's Delaware versus Florida. And briefly, because I know I've exceeded my time, this is a little bit of the tax structures I was telling you. The property, Florida corporation owning the property, offshore company owning the Florida corporation, and then the individuals owning the offshore. The LLC, dual member versus single member. The difference is, again, one of the reasons why I like LLCs over corporations is because for purposes of what I just said, confidentiality, in some biz and online, we can check a Florida corporation and who the directors are, and typically directors are persons. With the LLCs, the managers could be entities. And so if confidentiality is an issue, we set up a Delaware LLC to be the manager of the Florida LLC, and we're done with that issue. So that's why we prefer LLCs. Why Serber and Associates, but not again, and you don't have to use Serber and Associates, but yeah, I'm here to answer any questions. One of the ways that we found that we've built our business over time is we really cooperate with brokers, and we understand that when you're referring business to us, those are your clients. We're not going to take those clients away from you. We're not going to sell them services. All we're going to do is protect those clients and use it for them to use our services as lawyers for their transaction. The way that we open files, for example, internally, just if this is of any interest to you, is if you, as a broker, are referring clients to our firm, we give it every broker has a number, and that number gets repeated in the client file number. And so let's say 10 years from now, I get a client that says, hey, Danny, 10 years ago, you represented me in a unit that I bought in Acqualina, and I'm considering now buying something else. Who do you recommend? Just by looking at the client name and client file number, I know who sent me the client. So I can tell them, hey, didn't you use so-and-so for when you bought Acqualina? Yeah, I did. Well, are they still around? Yeah, can you refer me back to them? So I'm going to protect your clients. I'm not going to give it to anyone else. I don't compete with that or anything like that. The other thing that we do is we give priority to contracts. I know that with developers, they have a 15-day of rescission, right? But any contract that comes into our office or to our internal policy that within 24 hours we review the contracts. Our secret is that we've dealt with most developers in South Florida. We've negotiated addendums with most developers in South Florida. So we've read all the documents, we've read all the contracts, and we pretty much have negotiated addendums that are acceptable to the developer, but also protect the client's interest. And so we facilitate that process and that transaction. The tax advice, we don't charge the clients for any consultations. If you can bring them to the office, tell them to come, and then we'll meet with them, we'll understand what their needs are, we'll give them the right structure, and they're going to walk away happy, and they're going to have to pay us anything. Okay? And also, we don't charge for any fees unless the transaction closes, especially pre-construction. You know, we maybe meet with the client, talk about entities and corporations, whatever. We draft the addendum, negotiate with the developer, everything gets done. They don't owe us anything. And 3 years from now or 2 years from now, whenever the closing is, we'll charge them a small fee at the closing. That's it. Okay? And again, we're not going to advertise anything to your clients. We really protect and very protective of that information. Any questions? Nothing. Okay. So you didn't understand me? I spoke too fast. Oh, wait, and I have to say, anything else? No?
Here's a question.
Yeah.
If a foreigner does an offshore account, who opens up a Delaware LLC, who buys a property in Florida with a Florida LLC and rents it,
Right.
where does the rent go?
The rent goes to the Florida LLC. The Delaware LLC should be the manager of the Florida LLC. The offshore company should be the owner of both the Florida and the Delaware LLC.
And how about taxes?
Taxes, it depends on how you elect. When we sit down, we'll decide, because it's an LLC, how we treat it from a tax perspective. If we treat the LLC as a partnership, then the individual members of the offshore companies will be the ones paying and filing taxes. If we treat it as a corporation, it will be the Florida LLC that will be declaring and paying taxes at the corporate level. Yes?
When you create a structure such as the structure that this gentleman talked about a second ago, or any other kind of structure, is it advisable to open up a bank account immediately and start filing taxes that first same year?
Yeah, well, I think so, because with respect to bank accounts, I think it's important to open up bank accounts so you can keep clear understanding of all your expenses, and you kind of centralize everything in one place. It's easier for the accountant that you hire later to provide just the bank statements and it's all there, as opposed to trying to find where you paid the different things and receipts and whatever, so it's easier. It's not mandatory, but it's easier. The other thing that I like about bank accounts also is, we didn't talk about this, but corporations and LLCs offer the clients protection, right? God forbid should be an incident or an accident in the apartment on the property. The clients themselves are not responsible personally for that incident because the corporation and the LLC offer you that protection. The obligations of the LLC and the corporations don't pass through to the owners of the LLC. But there's exceptions, and one exception, which is called piercing the corporate veil, is if the LLC or the corporation they don't maintain corporate formalities. So if you don't have a bank account for the LLC, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. So that's one reason. The second part of the question was whether to file tax returns right away. So if an LLC or a corporation doesn't rent the unit, are they obligated to file a tax return?
Sure they are.
The LLC,
What do you think?
There's no income, no.
What do you think?
yes.
Okay, so here's the
You're declaring zero income at that point.
right. So here's
Yeah, so at the bottom.
so here's the answer. Okay, you should file. You should file. You should file because even if you're not getting income, you should file a tax return. It's the way to actually preserve your losses. You can have losses because you can have all these expenses, and you can carry those losses in the future. But what happens if you don't file? If you don't have any income and you file, I've seen it. You get two letters. You get one letter from the federal government, from the IRS, and you get a letter from the Florida Department of Revenue. The one for the IRS is actually it's a nice letter. It's the only nice letter they have that says, "Hey, we haven't, yeah." So it says we haven't received your tax return for this entity. Could it be that you didn't file it for one of the following reasons? Multiple choice. And one of the answers is there was no income or activity. You check that sign and you're done with the IRS. The Florida Department of Revenue says you owe me $300. You pay $300, you're done. That's basically it. But you should file the tax returns, even if you don't have an income. Yeah.
Costs less than a CPA.
Yeah, exactly. So you're thinking like a foreign client. I like that already. That's exactly what they tell me in my office. Wait, with $300 already. No, but you lose more money, and the loss by preserving those losses, you're going to make more money later when you sell. Then absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned that back in the day you would travel to the country and explain to potential clients why it was a good time to purchase at that time. What would you say is the selling point at this current market?
I think this current market reminds me a lot of the 2008, 2009. I really think it's a good time for foreign buyers to invest here. I really do. We do travel and we go to
Construction or
absolutely. Look, this is no secret. You've seen that prices have dropped, right? Now, it's not like in 2008, 2009 that there's a major crisis. People are showing up to closings. It's not like in 2008, 2009 that people were just not really investing in real estate. They were doing financial investments where they were trying to flip their contracts. It's like the old game when we were kids that, they would put chairs around in a circle and they put the music and you walk around. And then when the music ends, you have to grab a chair and whoever doesn't have a chair loses and is out. Well, that was what happened in 2008 and 2009, right? So people were buying pre-construction. They didn't want to close. They just wanted to make money because the developer kept raising prices and raising pricing and raising prices. So they would say, hey, I know it's not allowed in the contract, but we'll do some sort of assignment through the entities or whatever. I'll get my deposit back, I'll get some money, and that was it. But then when the music stopped, when people needed to show up to closing, they didn't. And they lost their monies, their deposits, and the developers were in trouble. They lost their buildings. It's not the case now, but we've seen a drop in prices in the real estate market. So I think it's a good, other than certain situations like end of the year, Christmas time, and now with the foreign buyers here because of the winter break, it seems to be a little bit slow. So when things slow down and prices are reduced, I think it's a good time. I go all the time. I've been to South America already this year 4 times. I'm probably going to go another 4 times more to talk to people and to clients. The other thing that I was going to offer you is that our firm does a lot with brokers is if you want to organize something, whether it's here in the U.S. or anywhere in the world. I don't know if anywhere in the world, but anyway. I don't know. I just came back from Russia. I loved Russia, by the way. But anyway, yeah, no. But anyway, we'll organize something. We'll go. You don't have to pay us anything. We'll pay for our own trip. We'll hotel. We'll pay for our own expenses. But if you want to organize an event for your clients where you can pitch Acqualina to them or any other project, Acqualina, and you want to say, look, and I'm bringing an expert in real estate and corporate matters in the U.S. and he's a lawyer and he's there to answer your questions. I do that all the time with brokers, and it's a great mechanism. I'm telling you, I had a broker that was actually keeping track. They were taking surveys. They had people fill out at the people that went to the presentations, and then we'll have reports as to how many of those people ended up buying with him. And the numbers are really astonishing. I mean, very high. If I tell you, you won't believe me, but if I recall, it's around 65% of the people that showed up to the seminars ended up buying with the broker. That's really high. Yeah.
When you're I guess going on your road shows.
Yeah.
Particularly to Latin America. The last real boom, particularly in pre-construction sales, and it was 2013, 2014.
Right.
Due to an extremely weak dollar at that time.
Right.
Yeah. So people were buying at 30% discounts, just changing the Brazilian real into dollars.
Yep.
So now we've got the dollar historically
It's high.
strong again,
Right.
and it's rising because interest rates are high.
Right.
So in those meetings, how do you get over that hurdle that the dollar is now at a disadvantage
Right.
as far as even trading into dollars from those places?
Well, number one, I think that's going to continue. So, I rather them, pre-construction is more difficult because you're not paying 100% today, right? But for people that want to take advantage, for example, of units already constructed or built, maybe it's a good time because you're freezing that today. You're investing in dollars today, and if that continues to be the case, if the market doesn't collapse, you're actually at the end going to walk away with a pretty good investment. But it's
So you're selling the point that you think that the dollar is going to continue.
I think so.
to escalate.
I think so. Yeah. And the other thing is especially with Latin America, not so much with Europe, but with Latin America, it's a lot has to do with what's happening in their country as opposed to in the U.S. And it's not just an issue of how weak or strong the dollar is, but economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, and it fluctuates and it changes so frequently in those countries that I think right now there are a lot of countries in South America, in Brazil, Argentina are some examples, where people are very upset with the political environment. They had, for example, in Argentina, high hopes with a new president that took office 2 or 3 years ago, and now they're super frustrated. The dollar is very high, unemployment is high, inflation is high, and people are getting desperate. Now, if you ask with the high net worth individuals that live in Argentina how they are doing financially, they tell you they're doing great. However, they don't trust their government. They don't want to invest that money in their countries. But, unless you go and get those clients and tell them, look, this may be a good chance for you to get some opportunities. When prices are dropping and people are not buying as much, maybe you can get a good deal here. You have to plant that seed in their minds because they're not thinking like that right now. And that's part of the job that you and I have to do to bring those clients here. Yeah.
It's not a law question, but you may not understand. A lot of foreigners are buying with loans.
Uh-huh.
So owning a Delaware LLC or offshore will prevent them from getting a loan, or they can.
Okay, so the question is, for those that didn't hear, a lot of foreigners are buying now with loans. And the question is whether the structure with a Delaware LLC, an offshore entity owning the Delaware LLC, if that prevents them from getting loans. And the answer is, it depends on the bank. I mean, we deal with banks that deal with foreign nationals all the time, and they're used to these types of structures, and that's not an issue. But if they're dealing with a specific bank that's an issue, then we'll address it. And what we do is we try to accommodate the needs of the client with a structure that the bank is comfortable with, and then once the loan is in place, we'll try to work around it.
Just to add to that, it generally results in substantially higher loan-to-value ratios. In other words, that customer has to bring substantially more equity than a 20% down payment. Sometimes they want to see 40, 50% down. and it's gonna be substantially higher interest rates.
Yeah.
So, like, if you get a good rate now, 4.5 points, if guys, if you're a citizen, you're gonna be paying close to 8 points for a foreign Russian. They really jacked up.
Yeah,
It's possible.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the things that I did see that's a good negotiating tool with the banks is banks are now hungry for deposits. So banks want deposits. And so, you can negotiate with a bank saying, okay, if you're going to give my client 60%, give him 50%. My client will put 10% in your bank. Reduce the interest rate. And so that's how you negotiate with those types of banks. Yeah?
So what you're saying is that you will work with the bank and with the lender in favor of the customer. So we will put you in contact with the lender and you will help us alleviate that.
I can help you out with anything you want. The reality is by most cases, by the time they come to my office, they already have pretty much everything worked out. These issues sometimes come up down the road because maybe there were certain discussions with their mortgage brokers or with their bank officers that they promised them something, and then when the bank finally issues a commitment, it's not exactly what they promised, and so that's what we kind of have to step in and negotiate with the bank. But if you introduce the clients to us at the very beginning, we'll be happy to do that.
Simplify everything because now we have a lender that is willing to lend to foreigners buyers,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a legal professional that will help them out from A to Z.
Right.
Instead to have you doing all the work and then in the end just have somebody just set up the stuff in the end.
Yep.
If you can take it out since the beginning, that guarantee you the customer and guarantee me that it's a smooth transaction.
Yeah, it's easier for me. Just so you know, if I didn't make this clear, like if you work specifically with a certain mortgage broker or a certain bank, it's not like when you send me the client, I'm going to refer him to somebody else. Like, again, I mean, if you tell me, look, I'm sending you this client, but I already have a contact with this bank or with this mortgage broker, I'm not going to try to sell him anything, But if you tell me, Danny, I need your help.
As long as I do the same.
I know, but I need to understand, what you want. So, yeah. Anything else? No? Again, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sorry that I ran over.